My husband began cheating on me when he joined the sports club. Always before the game, I could smell a strong scent from him. I just celebrated my 52nd birthday this past February. Normally, my husband of 25 years would organize parties for me on such occasions, but our marriage has been unraveling since he joined a mixed volleyball league, predominantly made up of women. This began nearly a year ago and set off a chain of events that led to our relationship's collapse. My husband, 46, might be experiencing a midlife crisis. Over the years, he put on weight, particularly during the pandemic lockdown when he worked from home. Despite his commitment to home workouts and dieting, the results weren't visible, and the lockdown took a toll on his emotional state. With our children moved out, it was mostly just the two of us. I never complained and did my best to encourage him. I understood it's part of getting older, and I've never been in peak shape myself. He's the attractive one who enjoys getting compliments, dressing up, and going out in public. His job in public relations makes him value his appearance and first impressions. When COVID-19 restrictions began to lift, he felt the need to join active group activities. We debated which group he should join and registered on an app called Meetup, which helps find local group activities. The most convenient option was a volleyball league meeting 3 times a week, mostly comprising female members. I wanted to join too, but my work schedule as a nurse, often involving long, late hours, didn't allow it. My husband thinks I'm a workaholic, but I enjoy the satisfaction of completing tasks. I work for a friend now, having given up my own practice due to the hectic responsibilities. I just wanted to work and go home, leaving others to handle additional tasks. After my husband joined the co-ed volleyball group, I remember his first game. He was exhausted, his whole body sore. I had to massage his feet and calves when I got home, and he said he really enjoyed it. After a few weeks, he couldn't stop talking about a woman named Lisa. He mentioned she was the best player on the team, but very bossy, and he disliked her. He claimed she flirted with all the men, described her as obnoxious, and a cheater who badmouthed her ex-husband, even though no one had ever seen him. She had been through multiple failed marriages and was known as a vintage car enthusiast. After a few more games, he began to complain that she used to smoke a lot and would invite some group members to smoke with her after the games. Keep in mind, this was a group of people in their 50s acting like teenagers. After about a month of my husband attending the games, he was getting back in shape, but still had issues with this woman. This time, his complaint was that she not only smoked, but was involved in dealing as well. She would get people hooked on samples and turn them into her customers. Her job was distributing, selling marijuana, and working as a mechanic. He mentioned that a long time ago, she was in the minor league and on the path to going pro before she had an accident while drag racing. She always had problems with substance misuse and lived a fast-paced life. I asked my husband how he knew all these personal things about her, and he said she wouldn't stop talking and bragging about everything. He explained that everyone liked her despite all that because she was funny, outgoing, offered to work on their cars for free, and gave out free marijuana. However, he emphasized that he didn't find her amusing. I recall a night when he came home smelling like marijuana. I asked why, and he told me that after the game, he was hanging out with some of his teammates, and they were smoking. It made sense, and there was no reason to doubt him. This started happening every time he returned from the game. He played 3 times a week, and each time he came back home smelling like marijuana. One time after the game, he took a shower and I joined him. We became intimate, and I kissed him. There was no mistaking that he had been smoking. I could taste it in his mouth. I asked him right then and there if he was smoking, and he said he tried it once because they were passing it around, and he felt it would be awkward if he didn't. I lost my temper, and the mood immediately changed because we have 3 kids together, a 24-year-old son, a 22-year-old daughter, and a 19-year-old son. I confronted him for being a hypocrite because he had told our children never to smoke or be influenced by peer pressure, and here he was doing exactly what he had warned them against. I inquired how he would react if our kids emulated his behavior, succumbing to peer pressure. His response was that I should calm down, and he brushed it off as a one-time occurrence, insisting he hadn't even inhaled it. I chose not to engage in an argument or lecture him about marijuana use because he was the type to preach to others and discipline our children if they engaged in such behavior. I'm generally the quiet type, not fond of confrontation, and certainly not the disciplinarian in our family. It surprised me to see him acting so out of character. The smoking itself didn't particularly bother me. It was his hypocrisy that troubled me. I wondered who he'd picked it up from, and found it unsettling that someone who would raise a fuss if my kids or I engaged in such activities seemed so nonchalant. He spent nearly a month complaining about this woman, emphasizing how awful she was, and then he went ahead and sampled her product. In the subsequent games, I noticed he continued to use marijuana, attempting to mask it by taking a shower, washing his sportswear, and brushing his teeth. Nevertheless, the odor lingered, but I refrained from confronting him again. I knew he would either lie or come up with some flimsy excuse, and I didn't want to broach the topic. I was secretly relieved because I had something to hold over his head in case he resorted to his usual self-righteous behavior. Christmas was approaching and my 3 children came to visit. My husband was conspicuously absent, which was unusual because he typically prepared the Christmas meal and hosted a big party with friends and family, cooking more than we could possibly eat. But this time, he was gone all day. When he returned, I asked him where he'd been, and he claimed he'd been visiting friends. When I probed further, he said he'd had car trouble, so he took his car to Lisa to fix it. I questioned why he hadn't informed us, especially since it was Christmas. His response seemed insufficient to me. I asked him what was going on, as he was aware Christmas was approaching, and his priority should have been spending time with the family, not fixing his car. I pointed out that most people spend the holiday with their families. He insisted he'd already told our daughter he'd be late, and that our daughter should prepare the Christmas meal. Even our children noticed the change in his behavior. They thought we were having marital problems because they believed we were arguing a lot, which was why their dad was offering all these excuses and failing to prepare for Christmas as he usually did. On Christmas Day, my daughter couldn't manage everything by herself. My husband claimed he was sick and retired to bed after returning from the supposed mechanic trip to fix his car. For the first time in a long while, I had to take my husband and kids to a restaurant on Christmas. My husband was in bed, and I had to convince him to come to the restaurant with us. He wanted me to tell the kids that he was sick, but I insisted he should tell them himself. I didn't want to have to explain to my kids that their dad had been making new friends, smoking a lot, and slacking. At that point, the idea that he might be having an affair hadn't crossed my mind. My daughter entered the room and noticed that something was off with her dad's behavior. Concerned, she realized he was acting unusually. He finally got up and started pretending like everything was okay. When we were at the restaurant, my kids noticed that he wasn't TT himself. He was making awkward jokes and seemed disconnected, as if he didn't want to be there but was forced to. After leaving the restaurant, my daughter jokingly asked me what I'd done to her dad because he was acting unlike himself. She also observed that my husband had lost a lot of weight and wondered if his behavior was related to his extreme weight loss. I decided to be honest with my daughter. I told her that her dad had joined a volleyball team, made some new unusual friends, and had started using marijuana with them. This had been going on for the past 4 months since he joined the volleyball team. My daughter thought it was a joke because my husband's actions were completely out of character. After Christmas, my kids left, and I talked to my husband about the need for change. I told him he couldn't continue acting like a college boy. At this point, it still hadn't crossed my mind that he might be having an affair. I had trusted him so much that I couldn't imagine him doing such a thing to me. The real trouble started when I noticed that our shared bank account, used to pay recurring bills like groceries and utilities, was overdrawn. I received a notification on my phone that $1,500 had been withdrawn from the account. I tried calling my husband, but he didn't answer his phone. I completed my work assignment, canceled the next one for the day, and decided to go home to check on him because something strange was going on. When I arrived home, I noticed a 1969 Ford Mustang parked on the street, a car I hadn't seen before. I have an affinity for classic cars, which is why it caught my attention. I am quite the enthusiast for classic automobiles. I parked my car in the driveway right behind my husband's car and went to open the front door to enter the house. I immediately noticed that someone had hastily exited through the door leading to the backyard. I assumed it was my husband because his car was in the driveway, and he had been home since his job no longer required him to work in the office due to the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions. As I was about to open the door, the backyard door slammed shut. Believing it was my husband who I didn't see, I couldn't wait to confront him about the withdrawal from our account. In my rush to ask him about the money taken from our account and why he hadn't been answering his phone, I headed toward the backyard door and opened it. I heard the backyard fence being opened. This alerted me that something was amiss, because for someone to reach the backyard fence so quickly, they must have been running. Therefore, I concluded that it wasn't my husband, and the only logical explanation was that it was a burglar or someone fleeing from me. The person, whoever it was, must have been running because I calculated the speed required to reach the fence within that time frame. The fence isn't visible when you open the backyard entrance door, since it is parallel to the building, and parts of the structure block the view. To see who enters or exits the backyard through the fence gate, you have to enter the backyard itself. By the time I reached the backyard and opened the gate, the person had vanished. I surveyed the surroundings and noticed the unmistakable smell of marijuana in the air, indicating that someone had been smoking there. Suddenly, I heard my husband calling me from the house, so I hurried back. When I saw him, he appeared as if he had just taken a shower. I inquired about the person who had been smoking in the backyard, and he denied anyone being there, asserting that he had smoked in the backyard earlier because he knew how much I disliked the smell. I told him that he was clearly not telling the truth, especially considering his unusual behavior over the past 5 months and his allowing people into our home. I confronted him about crossing a line. I asked him directly if he was having an affair, particularly with the person who had rushed off our property. He vehemently denied it and acted as though I were speaking a different language. I then questioned him about why he hadn't been answering my calls and the $1,500 withdrawal from our shared account, which we used for paying our bills. He explained that he had lent the money to a friend in need, and they would repay it as soon as possible. I was utterly bewildered at this point. It was hard to believe the words coming from my husband's mouth. They sounded like they were from either a gambler or someone obsessed with marijuana. The information was too bizarre to comprehend. I asked him if his friend believed he was a bank and why he hadn't sought my permission before making such a substantial withdrawal. He became irritable in response. I warned him that if he had given the money to his friends, there would be consequences. I made it clear that I expected the money back in the account by tomorrow. That evening, I took the time to review all our bank statements and noticed that he wasn't contributing his fair share of money to the account. A significant portion of my husband's income is based on commissions, so the more hours he puts in, the more money he earns. I observed that he was only contributing about 1/3 of the amount he was supposed to, which explained why the account balance was lower than usual and why I received a notification for the large withdrawal. I confronted him about not contributing his fair share and discovered that he was putting in only the bare minimum hours required to maintain his job. I inquired about what he had been doing with his time if he wasn't working. He began making excuses, claiming he was constantly tired due to working out and playing sports to lose weight. He argued that the kids were no longer at home, and we didn't need all that money anyway. I told him that if he decided to reduce his working hours, he should stop lending my money to his friends and cut down on hanging out with his marijuana-using buddies. I also insisted that he quit playing that sport. I gave him an ultimatum: it was either our marriage or his sports, and he reacted strongly. He hurled various insults at me, calling me insecure and saying I wasn't a woman enough. I informed him that if he continued to play, we might have to end our 25-year-long marriage. He became furious that I would even consider ending the marriage over something seemingly trivial. He suggested that I should talk to someone because he believed I was being emotional and acting immature. I told him that he wasn't the same person I had married, that he had changed overnight since starting this volleyball game and hanging out with his new friends. Despite being home all day, he no longer took care of household chores and cooking as he used to. He was barely working and appeared to be indulging in recreational activities like a college dropout. He accused me of being jealous of his improving appearance and life, implying he might consider my offer, and then he angrily left the room. We had an intense argument throughout that night, and I ended up sleeping on the couch. The following day, he refused to speak to me or cook for me, hoping that I would apologize and allow him to continue his negative behavior, completely disregarding the unexplained withdrawal from my account. We didn't exchange words that day. The next day happened to be one of his volleyball game days. Before I left for work, he attempted to grab my attention to see if I was serious about pursuing a divorce if he played his game. As I was getting ready for work, he walked past me and loudly declared that he would do as he pleased, asserting that I couldn't interfere with his happiness. I remained silent, got dressed, and left the house. In the afternoon, I contacted a divorce lawyer to prepare a separation agreement. My intention was to shock my husband, hoping that he would realize the potential loss of his family due to his actions. Whether you might call it a midlife crisis or menopause, I believed that serving him divorce papers might jolt him out of it. The lawyer drafted a legal separation document, and I picked it up after work. When I returned home, my husband was not there, and I wasn't sure where he had gone. When he finally came home, I noticed he wasn't dressed for a volleyball game. My plan was to serve him with the divorce papers to emphasize that I was serious, with the hope that he wouldn't assign them. Despite the challenges he had put me through, I still loved my husband and didn't want to lose him. My goal was for him to realize that he might end up divorced and without anyone to support him. He entered through the front door, and I was waiting in the living room. As he passed by me, he continued to give me the silent treatment, heading to the kitchen to prepare food for himself. I left the couch to retrieve the divorce papers. He was still in the kitchen when I handed him the papers to sign. The expression of shock on his face, with wide-open eyes and mouth, caught me off guard. I hadn't expected his next move. He pushed me and threw the divorce papers at my face, expressing disbelief that I would follow through with this. He left the kitchen in tears, exclaiming that he couldn't believe I was taking these steps. He ran upstairs to the master bedroom, crying and lamenting that I had initiated the divorce proceedings, even though he hadn't gone to the volleyball game. I found myself in the kitchen, the divorce papers scattered across the floor, but I couldn't help but smile because everything had gone according to plan. Collecting the papers, I placed them back in the folder, thinking that perhaps this had given him the shock he needed. Later that night, I received a call from my daughter, who asked me why I was divorcing her dad over a volleyball game. It turned out that my husband had complained to our daughter about me. At that moment, I knew I had already succeeded. Knowing my husband, I was aware that he was too embarrassed to beg himself, so he was trying to use our daughter as an intermediary. I explained to my daughter that she had visited us during Christmas and had seen her father's condition and strange behavior. I didn't explicitly mention my suspicion of my husband having an affair, but interestingly, my daughter remarked that it didn't seem like he was having an affair and encouraged me to work through this challenging period with him. We spent over an hour on the phone. The following day, before heading to work, my husband surprised me by preparing breakfast and lunch for the first time in about 6 months. He apologized for everything he had put me through and assured me that he would start behaving correctly. He claimed he had done some introspection and realized his wrongs. I told him I would give him a month to get his act together, and if he continued to smoke and hang out with his friends, then I would have no choice but to proceed with the divorce. I also reminded him that the money needed to be repaid to my account, and he agreed. We made amends, and I left for work. The following day, when I returned home, my husband and I had another conversation. He confided in me, explaining that he's been under a great deal of stress due to how COVID-19 has impacted his job, coupled with my heavy work schedule. He admitted that he had been seeking an escape. Initially, the volleyball game provided some relief, but he eventually succumbed to the allure of marijuana and began using it. He mentioned that it had a relaxing effect and helped alleviate his anxiety. For the first time, he revealed that he had been battling depression and had been taking medication for it. Surprisingly, he disclosed that since he started using marijuana, his reliance on depression medication had gradually decreased. I asked him about the person in our backyard who had fled, and he claimed there was nobody there. However, I could tell he was not being truthful. Regarding the money withdrawal, he apologized and asked me not to be offended, explaining that it might take him a while to replace the money because he used it to buy marijuana. Although I was deeply upset, I didn't want to disrupt the moment, as my husband appeared to be showing remorse, like he was having a significant realization. I hoped that after this, I could finally have my husband back. The next couple of days were relatively normal, as if we had returned to our usual routine. I came to terms with the fact that his smoking might not cease since he claimed it helped with his anxiety and depression. I assured him that I wasn't overly concerned about his smoking. My main worry was the people he purchased it from, as those who deal with such substances are often questionable characters since my state doesn't permit marijuana. He continued to smoke in secret, trying to conceal it from me as much as possible. I opted not to confront him to avoid a conflict, which inadvertently made him think he was adept at hiding it. He began picking up extra hours at work and contributed slightly more to our shared account, although not to the extent he had before. I was responsible for the mortgage, the largest bill, and our shared account was intended to cover various expenses. In the end, I was covering around 70-80 of the expenses. One evening, while we were watching TV together, his cell phone rang, and he answered it, then walked into another room. I could hear him giggling from the other room. A few minutes later, he returned to the couch, and I asked him who it was. He got defensive and claimed it was just a friend. I found his reaction unusual, which raised a red flag. On another occasion, I came home early and opened my refrigerator to grab some beer, but it was missing. Since only my husband and I live at home, our kids have moved out, and he doesn't drink beer, I wondered who might have taken it. I considered the possibility that he had cleared some space in the refrigerator, but it didn't seem likely. This led me to suspect that my husband might be inviting someone over without being entirely honest with me. Thanksgiving came and went, and my kids noticed that my husband was behaving better than he had during Christmas, but I had a feeling he was just putting on an act. In February, he began reverting to his old ways, smoking excessively, sleeping throughout the day, and working less. When my birthday came, he didn't throw me a surprise party, buy me a gift, or want to go out for dinner to celebrate. My kids called to wish me a happy birthday. I reminded him that he had forgotten my birthday, and he was surprised he had forgotten. I told him that he was smoking too much, and it seemed to be affecting his memory. He explained he had marked it on his calendar, but had forgotten and apologized to me. I first encountered the Ring doorbell at one of my client S houses, and we communicated through it. I hadn't known about the Ring before, but I thought it was great that it allowed you to see who was at your front door in real time, and it connected to your phone. In the back of my mind, I considered using it to monitor my husband, observing what he did throughout the day and who he was inviting into our home. So I purchased the Ring doorbell and installed it in our house. Initially, when I installed the camera, my husband didn't pay it much attention. He knew I'd always been a gadget girl and considered it just one of my many useless gadgets, as he often called them. The Ring doorbell was connected to my Wi-Fi, so I received notifications when someone was at our door, and it recorded videos in the cloud that I could access at any time. On the first day after installation, while I was at work, I received a motion-activated video recording notification from the Ring. I was busy and didn't have a chance to check my phone for at least an hour. When I finally checked the Ring notification, I saw a woman at our front door. She didn't even have to knock. My husband was already there waiting for her. He opened the door and welcomed her inside. It was clear that he knew her. The thought racing through my mind at that moment was that this could be the same woman who had dashed through my backyard, the one who'd have been helping herself to my beer in my absence. Maybe this was Lisa, the person supplying marijuana to my husband, or even the woman he might be having an affair with. I quickly checked the real-time camera feed, and it appeared the woman was still inside my house and hadn't left. I was 30 minutes away from home and hadn't even completed my current assignment. I informed the client that I needed to return and sped home as fast as I could. The woman had been in my house for over an hour, and I monitored the Ring camera on my phone as I drove. The video feed wasn't very reliable while driving. It kept freezing, so I decided to focus on the road instead, making my way home as quickly as possible to catch her inside my house. I felt my anger and anxiety building up. Upon arriving home, I only saw my husband's car in the driveway. I rushed inside, heading straight to the master bedroom. The room was empty, the bed was disheveled, and the air felt stuffy. I couldn't tell if it was from my husband's shower or just the stagnant air. My husband was nowhere to be found in the bedroom, nor was the woman. I checked the closet and under the bed. At that moment, I heard the backyard door open, so I hurried downstairs to see who it might be, thinking the woman might be trying to escape as she had before. As I was halfway down the stairs, my husband emerged from his home office located downstairs near the kitchen. He had a shocked expression, eyes wide open, as if he had seen a ghost. I noticed he was wearing only a white robe, and he told me that ID startled him, asking why I was home early and why I seemed so anxious. I had to collect myself, not wanting to give any indication that I suspected a woman had just been in my house, possibly involved with my husband, and that I'd narrowly missed catching them in the act. It started to sink in that I just missed them. I decided there was no need to confront him, as I knew he would deny everything, even if I showed him the ring footage of her entering the house. Instead, I thought it best to wait and catch them in the act. From the look in his eyes, I could tell he suspected something was amiss, but couldn't figure out how I knew or why I wasn't confronting him. I came up with a random excuse, pretending to be searching for a tool, a Makita cordless metal hole punch. Although he had no idea what that was, I wanted to act as if everything was normal, while I could sense him trying to read my reactions. I descended into the basement, grabbed a random tool, and returned to the main part of the house. He was still standing there, almost like he was in a state of shock and couldn't move. I approached him and gave him a kiss on the cheek, as I typically do when leaving the house. Even as I got closer to him, it was evident that he had been smoking not too long ago. I pulled back from him as if everything was normal, inquired why he was acting strangely, and if he was okay. He replied with a yes and escorted me to the door. As I walked toward the driveway, I couldn't help but wonder how this woman managed to be with my husband and escape right under my nose. I believed this might have been the second time she had been with him, and I had narrowly missed catching her. I considered the possibility that she might still be hiding inside the house. I decided to check the ring footage to see if she had already left. My husband was still at the door when I reached my car, just staring at me. I tried to act as normal as possible, but once I got into my work van, I felt paralyzed. I knew he was watching me from the partially open door, so I sat in my car, pretending to look at my paperwork while checking my phone to confirm whether she had left the house. Indeed, she had left before I arrived home. I had just missed her again. As I sat there reviewing the ring footage, my cell phone rang, and it was my friend, the person I worked for, asking why I left the client's place without completing the job, as the client was complaining. I was working on a bathroom renovation for the client and contemplated calling off the job for the day, but I knew it would be a hassle for another nurse to pick up where I'd left off. Therefore, I decided to return to work and finish the job for the client. I found it difficult to concentrate at work, although my nursing skills were second nature to me. My mind kept returning to the bewildering idea that my husband was willing to throw away 25 years of marriage for a marijuana seller and some recreational time. I couldn't fathom how he transformed from a well-mannered husband with strict traditional values into a frequent marijuana user, despite his promises to quit. After finishing my work that day, I couldn't bear going home, so I sat in my van contemplating my next steps. I decided to visit a local bar, despite not being a heavy drinker, just to be around people. At the bar, I ordered some beer and sat on a bar stool deep in thought. I came up with the idea of purchasing a video recorder and a GPS device to install in my husband's car, allowing me to monitor his movements. I went to a nearby electronics store but couldn't find a reputable GPS or hidden camera. I ended up using my phone to order one online, but I did manage to buy 2 voice-activated recorders, intending to place them in my bedroom and my husband's home office. When I returned home, my husband had prepared my favorite meal, something he used to do in the past, especially when he felt guilty about something. I remained composed and pretended that everything was normal. After a while, I went upstairs to take a shower and join him for dinner. I even remarked that it was unusual for him to be making dinner, and he tried to insist that he always did. We both chuckled it off. I made an effort to conceal my pain and resentment toward my husband. However, after dinner, I could no longer contain my emotions, and I felt the urge to confront him. Instead, I decided to take the dog for a walk. I told my husband that I was going out for a walk. Walking the dog helped clear my mind. I considered calling my daughter to inform her about her dad's affair, but decided against it, not wanting to involve her, fearing she might jeopardize my plans to catch my husband red-handed. I was seeking more evidence, although I already had some. I wanted to confirm that I wasn't imagining things. I had seen his affair partner on my ring camera, a brown-haired, tall, skinny woman. I knew her face and could pick her out of a lineup. I just wanted to see how deep this situation went. When I returned home, my husband was already asleep. I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in the same bed where he might have been with his dealer affair partner just hours ago. Sleeping in the guest room would arouse suspicion, so I decided to endure my discomfort and sleep next to him. That night, I struggled to sleep, woke up in the middle of the night, and installed the voice-activated recorder in his office in our bedroom. The following morning, he woke up before me and prepared breakfast, as if nothing had happened. It was easier for me to pretend this time compared to the previous day. At work that day, I couldn't resist checking my Ring camera regularly, even though I had set up notifications for any motion detected. My husband only left the house to go grocery shopping, as he had called me to let me know, and returned with bags. The second and third days were uneventful. He rarely left the house, and I began to wonder if something was amiss, or if he had caught on to my Ring camera surveillance. So on the evening of the third day after I had spotted the stranger at my door, I retrieved the voice-activated recorder, went to my car, and started listening to the recorded conversations. It became evident that my husband had been spending hours on the phone with this woman named Lisa, who was a part of his volleyball group. From their conversation, it seemed like my husband was no longer attending the games, but he had developed a close relationship with her. She was asking when she could come over, but my husband expressed concern that I had unexpectedly shown up at home one time, making him apprehensive about being intimate at our house. They couldn't be intimate at her place, due to her boyfriend and 3 kids, and she didn't want to spend money on a hotel. She suggested they meet in a parking lot, but my husband refused to be intimate in that setting. He had a clear boundary. A parking lot was crossing the line for him. Yet being intimate in our bed was somehow acceptable. She proposed that he come to her workplace, where they had been intimate before, but he was concerned about her business partner. Apparently, during Christmas, he went to see her at her shop, and her partner caught them. She coons a mechanic shop with her business partner, and her partner didn't appreciate their workplace being used for such activities. Still, she was insistent on having my husband visit her place of business, even if it jeopardized their business relationship, all for intimacy with a married man. Based on their conversation, it seemed like my husband was receiving marijuana in exchange for intimacy, or at the very least, a discount. That was the impression I got from their discussion. Lying in bed, I contemplated my next steps and how to proceed from here. I feared that my plan had backfired because my husband had grown suspicious, potentially missing an opportunity to confront him on D-Day. The next morning, while taking a shower, I had the idea to locate my husband's stash of marijuana. I knew he was smoking daily and trying to mask his breath with peppermint and mouthwash to hide it from me. I suspected he might be dependent on it as a coping mechanism, since he wasn't taking his medication. My plan was to find his stash and dispose of it, forcing him to invite her for more. The challenge was how to locate the stash without him knowing. He was home all day, only leaving the house for a couple of hours. It seemed I might have to thoroughly search the house to find it. However, I was reminded that my daughter would be visiting our house for the weekend to see her dad. They typically go to his dad's place in the countryside for the entire day, which would give me enough time in the house to search for his stash. This visit was not unusual since they visited his dad about once a month. I had already returned the voice recorder to his office. The rest of the week was uneventful, looking ahead to when my daughter paid us a visit. She inquired about her dad's well-being, and I assured her that everything was fine. I refrained from revealing anything to her, as I suspected that she might inadvertently tip off my husband. My daughter isn't the best at keeping secrets. On Friday, the GPS and hidden camera I had ordered arrived. On Saturday morning, my husband and daughter set out to visit his dad. With them out of the house, I took the opportunity to listen to the voice-activated recorder in my husband's office. It confirmed my suspicions about the woman involved in his life, indicating she was a dealer, possibly dealing with more than just marijuana. However, I couldn't determine if my husband was using anything more than cannabis. I also learned from the recordings that the woman used to play for a minor league and was on the path to going pro until she had an accident, which led to an obsession with painkillers. This was her downfall. In contrast, my husband didn't have any known traumatic experiences, so it baffled me why he was drawn to such a person and started using marijuana. His upbringing had been fairly normal, and his recent revelation about depression caught me off guard. Perhaps it stemmed from the prolonged time he spent at home, potentially leading to weight gain. My husband retained his suspicions that I had discovered his affair, but when questioned about how he knew, he claimed ignorance regarding my sources. I surmised that he might have made this statement to deter her, as she was eager to meet him. Before he left with our daughter for the weekend, I installed the camera in both the master bedroom and the living room. My next task was to locate my husband's stash of marijuana. I scoured the entire house, contemplating even hiring a sniffer dog, yet by the day's end, I came up empty-handed, leading me to believe he either had nothing left or had taken it with him. Their return was scheduled for Sunday afternoon. While sitting on the couch watching TV, an idea struck me. I should search the backyard for any potential hiding spots. I ventured outside about an hour before sunset and began inspecting the area. I suspected that he might have buried his stash, but to my fortune, I didn't have to wait long before stumbling upon a Ziploc bag containing marijuana and a grinder. I promptly disposed of the marijuana down the toilet and discreetly returned the Ziploc bag to its original location. It appeared that he hid it outdoors to avoid arousing suspicion due to the smell, since he often engaged in his activities in the backyard, and his affair partner had once slipped away from there. I made the decision to move the camera from the living room to the backyard. My goal was to conceal it so that it wouldn't be too conspicuous. Once I had set up the camera, I conducted a test run, and it performed well. This put me at ease, as I could now monitor the activities in my house without my husband having any clue about it. My next step was to install the GPS in his car once he returned from his visit to his dad's. My ultimate objective was to gather evidence against him for our eventual divorce. He came back home that Sunday evening, and after he'd gone to bed, I discreetly installed the GPS device in his car. On Monday morning, my daughter returned to her own place, and during my work hours, I contacted the same divorce lawyer who had previously drafted our separation agreement. I laid out my situation for the lawyer, including my husband's infidelity. I asked how I could leverage the recorded evidence to my advantage, but he explained that it would have little impact on my divorce case, as our state operates under a no-fault divorce system. This means that we can only cite irreconcilable differences as the reason for our divorce, and my husband cannot be penalized for his infidelity by a judge. The lawyer assured me that the divorce paperwork would be ready the following day. I also confided in my friend, the one I work for, about my situation. He understood that I might have to leave work at any moment because the camera was linked to my phone while I was at my job, allowing me to monitor my husband's movements. On that particular day, I observed my husband in the backyard, searching for his marijuana. He appeared quite frustrated but eventually returned inside the house. I had my phone on standby, ready to be alerted if he invited her over again. However, instead of that, he got into his car and drove away. Since I had the GPS installed in his car, I could track his location. He drove to an unfamiliar place and stayed there for about 30 minutes before returning home. I marked the location for further investigation to find out where he had gone. I felt a bit disappointed that things didn't unfold as I had originally planned, but at least with the GPS in his car, I had some insight into his activities. When he came back home, he headed to the backyard, lit up some marijuana, and concealed the rest in the same spot. This confirmed my suspicion that he'd gone to meet her to obtain more. One thing I forgot to mention is that once I discovered his infidelity, I promptly went for an STD test, and fortunately the results came back negative. Since catching his affair partner on my Ring camera, I haven't had any intimacy with my husband. Historically, I've been the one initiating it in our relationship, so he hasn't actively sought it from me. Moreover, he's already romantically involved with his affair partner, and I strongly suspect that during his recent visit to her, they most likely had a physical relationship. There was no other reason for him to spend 30 minutes at that location. After work, I managed to trace the area he had visited and discovered that it was a mechanic shop. To my surprise, I spotted the unmistakable 1969 Ford Mustang, the same car I had seen on my street on the day I almost caught someone fleeing from my backyard. I felt intense anger, knowing that this woman had been inside my house. I felt disrespected and had an urge to confront her right then and there, but I had to talk myself out of it. It's unsettling to think that she was so familiar with my backyard, suggesting she may have been there before. I parked my work van a few blocks away from her shop to observe it for a stakeout. It was getting late, but I remained there until I noticed her emerging from the shop with another friend. They had closed the garage doors of their shop and were standing in front, presumably smoking. I couldn't be certain if they were smoking cigarettes or marijuana, as I was too far away to discern. I should have been on my way home, but I couldn't resist waiting and watching them. Deep down, I was comparing myself to her and questioning why my husband had chosen her over me, why he had opted to betray me with her. Something about her life excited him, something I couldn't replicate. Maybe he had grown weary of pretending to be a good person and had decided to reveal his true nature, After they finished smoking, she got into her car and drove off. I saw this as my opportunity to follow her and discover where she lived. She had already been to my house multiple times, engaged with my husband, so it seemed only fair that I should know where she lives in the hope of disrupting her relationship with her boyfriend. Eventually, I wanted to hurt this woman. Dark thoughts swirled in my mind. I had a concealed hand tool, a Springfield Hellcat, in my car. I thought about driving up to her and confronting her there. However, I realized that I'd probably become the prime suspect if they discovered she had been with my husband. She drove her car to a restaurant and picked up a man. Initially, I assumed that the man was her boyfriend, so I took some pictures with my phone. The pictures weren't very clear due to the fading light, but I parked on the street to remain inconspicuous. She collected the male passenger, and I trailed behind her. They arrived at an apartment building with street parking, and I could discern from their body language that he wasn't her boyfriend. Their behavior indicated a strong attraction, as they couldn't keep their hands off each other while entering the apartment. My suspicion grew that he might be another one of the men she was involved with romantically. I pondered whether to wait for her to exit so I could follow her and uncover her residence. Yet with no certainty of when she would leave, I opted to capture a picture of her license plate number and returned home for the day. Now I knew that this woman wasn't just a dealer, but also a womanizer, with my husband being one of the men she was engaged with. The following days were exceedingly disheartening, and it became increasingly challenging to share a room with him. I was losing hope and contemplating ending it all, proceeding with the divorce so we could go our separate ways. I feared that sooner or later, he would decipher the purpose of the Ring doorbell, discover the voice-activated recorder, or detect the hidden camera I was using to spy on him. It was a monotonous week, observing him conversing with his affair partner and watching him on camera smoking in the backyard at least twice a day. I estimated that it might take him 34 weeks to deplete his marijuana stash, and I didn't want to wait that long. I couldn't endure living in the same house with him for such an extended period, knowing he was involved with another woman. I wanted to bring this situation to a conclusion. So when he went to bed, I ventured into the backyard with my flashlight and excavated his bag of marijuana. I noticed that it also contained a blend of tobacco and marijuana. In any case, I removed more than half of the contents, returned the rest, and then retired to bed. After I left for work one morning, I observed him on camera smoking. I'm unsure if he noticed the reduction in the stash. Skipping ahead 3 days, I've been gathering all my documents in order. Besides the shared account, which doesn't hold substantial funds, and the house, which has already been paid off, there's nothing else that requires division except for our retirement savings. He has approximately $60,000 in his 401k, whereas I have around $750,000 in my Roth account. I anticipate that he will try to claim a share of my Roth account. According to my lawyer, a portion of my retirement savings will need to be allocated to him due to the duration of our marriage. However, he is unaware of the exact amount in my Roth account, since he has always been passive about retirement planning. I was the one responsible for financial planning and earning money, while his role was primarily focused on spending. I even had to persuade him to open a 401k account 8 years ago, and he made minimal contributions. The bulk of the savings is essentially free money, and he hasn't taken advantage of it. His tendency has been to rely on me, all the while complaining that I work excessively or don't take enough time off. In reality, our plan was to retire early, motivating my hard work and dedication. Now that our children are grown, we intended to relocate to Central America and spend the rest of our lives happily. However, it seems he prematurely checked out of our marriage and is now engaging in an affair. He is poised to take half of the work and effort I've invested over the years. My attorney mentioned that typically, the longer the marriage, the more likely it is that retirement accounts will be divided fairly equally. I cannot allow this to happen. My hard-earned assets cannot go to waste. I upheld my end of the deal, remaining a loyal and caring spouse, providing for my family, and working diligently to ensure his happiness. Despite my efforts, he decided to engage in a romantic relationship with another woman. Based on the voice recording, I don't believe he intends to leave me for her. It appears he's merely enjoying the excitement of a fling. I don't think he's willing to trade the stable life he has with me for an unpredictable dealer, but he revels in the thrill. He mentioned this on the voice-activated recorder. He can't contain his laughter at her remarks. She attempted to persuade him to leave me, even though she has a boyfriend and young children. I understand that listening to the voice-activated recorder is emotionally taxing, considering the things he's saying about me. Nevertheless, it's crucial that I uncover the truth and understand his thoughts about me. He referred to me as boring and unadventurous, criticized my performance in bed, and suggested that I didn't measure up to her, even dubbing me a 5-minute woman, which is not accurate. I suspect he was saying these things to boost her ego. She's only 35 years old, a younger age than I initially thought, possibly because the volleyball group primarily consisted of individuals in their 50s, as I presumed. She frequently complimented him, which bolstered his fragile self-esteem. I've come across instances on this site where younger women focus on middle-aged men with self-esteem issues, finding it easy to engage in intimate relationships with them. Using her license plate, I managed to uncover her place of residence and conducted some surveillance by driving past her house on a couple of occasions to keep an eye on her. During these observations, I noticed her boyfriend, and she has 3 children, all under the age of 12. One evening, while we were in bed, my husband initiated intimacy. I can't recall the last time this happened, but I informed him that I was too fatigued for it. He became upset because we hadn't been intimate for weeks. My reluctance to be close with him was due to the knowledge of his ongoing involvement with his affair partner. I mentioned that it had been a demanding week at work as an excuse. The truth is, I still find him physically appealing, and I do desire intimacy with him. However, in my view, he has become tainted, similar to a person engaging in street solicitation, and I felt that engaging with him would legitimize his actions. 2 days later, while I was at work, I received a notification from my Ring doorbell and promptly checked it. It was her, and my husband had invited her in, similar to previous occasions. This time I wasn't far from home, only about 15 minutes away. I swiftly got into my car and headed back home, arriving in less than 10 minutes. On this occasion, I decided not to park my car in the driveway to avoid drawing attention, instead parking on the street. I had my Hellcat, which I always carry in my car, although I hadn't anticipated using it. I was emotionally prepared, having had time to contemplate such a moment. My intention wasn't to take a life, regardless of how strong my desire was to confront this woman for showing disrespect. However, I had my personal protection. Given that she is involved in dealing, I wasn't sure about her potential capabilities. My goal was to confront her at gunpoint and call the authorities. I hoped that she had marijuana on her, which would lead to her arrest. I had my phone set to record, hanging it in my left shirt pocket to capture audio without needing to hold it to avoid the front door. I chose to enter through the backyard fence since I believed the backyard was her potential escape route. At this point, approximately 20 minutes had passed since I received the Ring notification on my phone. I carefully slid the bolt of the wooden fence gate latch to open it from the outside, all while keeping my camera in my left pocket, still recording. As I entered through the backyard door, leading to the kitchen, I held my keys in my right hand and my Hellcat in my left. Both the backyard and the kitchen doors were wide open. There, in my living room, I found my husband and the person he was involved with, both unclothed, engaging in an intimate act on the living room couch. Due to the open floor plan, I could see the living room from my vantage point in the kitchen. I dropped my keys on the floor to free up both of my hands to hold my Hellcat. They were both taken aback upon seeing me. Without hesitation, I began giving them commands to lie down on the floor or face dire consequences. They complied, with the woman quickly getting on the floor. She was partially dressed, attempting to put on her pants before I ordered her to stop. While she was lying on the ground, my husband, who was now wearing a robe, tried to de-escalate the situation by saying, "I'm sorry, it's not what it seems." I made sure my left pocket camera was still recording, because my left arm had partially obstructed the view. I continued to point my Hellcat at the affair partner, cursing at her. My husband, now wearing a robe, slowly attempted to rise. I allowed him to, as I was focused on the affair partner, and I ordered him to join her and stay flat on the ground. This action made it clear to him that I was serious, and he promptly obeyed. Later, I reviewed the recorded footage to gather these details. As my adrenaline had been running high, I knew I needed to establish control of the situation before contacting the police. With my husband on the floor, apologizing and insisting that his affair partner Lisa meant nothing to him, She began begging me not to harm her. I took out my phone and dialed emergency. I told the dispatcher that a dealer was selling to my husband in my house, and I had them down at gunpoint. The police dispatcher instructed me not to take any action and to wait for the arrival of the police. After ending the call with the dispatcher, I instructed Lisa to stretch both her hands forward while lying down and pleaded with her not to give me a reason to use force. My husband remained on the floor, pleading with me. I walked over to the front door and swung it wide open, making it easy for the police to enter when they arrived. I noticed a bag of marijuana on the living room table. Although it wasn't a substantial amount, I hoped it would be sufficient for the police to arrest her. I waited for what felt like an eternity, about 5 minutes. At this point, I was tired of keeping both of them terrified, all the while recording the entire incident. So, I decided to FaceTime my daughter, despite my husband's pleas to refrain from doing so. My daughter witnessed her father lying there with his semi-naked affair partner. I explained the situation to her, and she began to cry, unable to believe what she was seeing. My husband felt embarrassed. His head hung low. As my daughter spoke, I heard the police vehicles pull into my driveway. They entered my house as I lowered my Hellcat. I approached them at the door and briefed them on the situation. Initially, there were 2 officers, but 2 more soon arrived, making a total of 4 officers and 2 patrol cars. The first officers detained her for the marijuana in the living room. She attempted to shift the blame onto my husband, claiming it was his marijuana, not hers. It was quite amusing to watch them both accusing each other of ownership, effectively incriminating themselves. My husband tried to deny it was his, insisting it belonged to her, but she admitted to selling it to him, effectively relinquishing ownership. In retrospect, I probably should have told the police it was my husband's, and you'll understand why later on. The police couldn't determine ownership definitively, so they detained both of them. Now there were 3 patrol cars parked in front of my house. They placed my husband in one of the patrol cars, allowing him to put on his clothing while he still had his robe on. It was an embarrassing moment since all the police officers, who were male, saw my husband partially unclothed. I felt somewhat uncomfortable about it, but I had to remind myself that he was now a matter of public record due to his involvement with these unsavory individuals. Upon weighing the marijuana, they found it to be around 4 ounces, which is close to being a state jail felony. However, one of the officers later told me privately that the judge might reduce the charge to a Class A misdemeanor possession if it was determined to be my husband's. By now, I wanted the police to take severe action against his affair partner. The cops escorted her to her car to search for more marijuana, but she refused, stating they needed a warrant to do so. The cop replied that they had probable cause to believe the car contained evidence of criminal activities, since she had already admitted earlier to giving the marijuana to my husband, essentially acknowledging her intention to distribute or sell it. It seemed as if all the police in my city had nothing else to do because more officers arrived. You would think a major drug bust was unfolding. Even the K-9 unit joined the scene, making it clear they were determined to throw the book at this woman. Due to her prior criminal record, they were handling this case with significant force, attempting to secure a lengthy sentence for her. After their search, they found approximately 4 pounds of marijuana in her possession, enough for a state jail felony. This offense carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 180 days imprisonment, a maximum of 2 years imprisonment, and a fine not exceeding $10,000. The evidence appeared solid, although the length of her prior offenses was uncertain, but it's likely she would face up to 2 years in prison. I'm not sure if an affair with another woman's husband is worth all that trouble, but she chose the wrong person's husband to become involved with. They later charged her with the marijuana found in my house and released my husband. She was arrested and taken away, while her friend later came to retrieve her car. I also informed the police that I wanted her charged with trespassing, but they explained that she couldn't be charged with trespassing because infidelity isn't a crime, and she was invited by my husband. They mentioned that they might need me to come to the police station to provide additional statements, even though I had already given my statement. Once my husband was released from the police car, he rushed into the bedroom and locked himself in. My daughter called me, revealing that my husband had been trying to contact her, but she refused to answer. She asked me what had happened, and I shared the whole story. She was in tears the entire time, and although I felt bad for live streaming the situation with my husband and his affair partner, It wasn't my fault. My husband had put us in this predicament, and I wasn't the only one who should be experiencing the consequences. My daughter inquired about the next steps, and I explained that I had already contacted and hired a real estate agent, and we would be selling the house. I also mentioned that I had found a divorce lawyer, and the divorce agreement had already been prepared. All that remained was to serve him with it. My daughter told me she would visit us next week. After our conversation, I knew it would be difficult for her, as she is very close to her father. In the evening, I had mixed emotions about the entire situation, and my husband remained in the room. I felt a deep sense of sadness, as our 25 years of marriage seemed to go down the drain. There were no heroes in this story, and it wasn't how I envisioned our relationship ending. Just 2 years ago, my husband and I vacationed in Central America, visiting countries like Costa Rica, Panama, and Guatemala to look for houses to purchase. In just 1 year, he had thrown everything away, and I couldn't help but wonder why. His carelessness in inviting her to our home was a shocking revelation. I'm relieved he did, because it revealed his true colors, and who knows if he had done this before. She might not be his only affair. That evening, I went to a local bar to have drinks with a friend. We discussed various topics, avoiding any mention of my husband and the earlier events. I was trying to divert my mind from the whole situation. While at the bar, drinking and chatting with my friend, my eldest son called. He had been informed by his sister about what had happened. He apologized for his father's actions and expressed his willingness to support any decision I made. He understood that his father had put everyone in this difficult position. This made me proud and emphasized that my son had matured. He also has a serious girlfriend, and they've already moved in together. I used to give him relationship advice, but now I felt like I was the one in need of guidance. When I returned home that evening, I didn't want to see my husband, so I chose to sleep in a different room. The following day, I went to work and had a conversation with my youngest son. I confided in my friend about what had transpired, and he offered his support. He also said he'd understand if I needed some time off to manage the divorce. I left work early to visit the lawyer's office before it closed. I collected the divorce agreement for my husband to sign and contacted the real estate agent to list the property for sale on the MLS. She informed me that she'd come by during the weekend to take some photos. When I returned home, my husband was waiting for me and expressed his readiness to talk. I told him I wouldn't engage in a conversation until he signed the divorce papers. He insisted that I allow him to speak first, promising to sign the divorce papers afterward. He even hinted that if I didn't let him talk, he might prolong the divorce process. I reminded him that he was in no position to make threats. If he wanted a public divorce, I was prepared to take it to the Supreme Court, and this calmed him down as he realized I didn't make empty threats. He requested that I bring the divorce papers for him to sign, but he also asked for an explanation of the terms within the divorce agreement before signing. I informed him that we planned to sell the house and divide the proceeds with a split of $6,040 in his favor. He would receive the $5,000 currently in our joint account as part of the agreement. In return, he agreed to an amicable divorce and would not make any claims on my retirement. He found this arrangement fair, and I concurred with his assessment. After he signed the papers, he expressed a desire to explain how the affair had started and the details of his involvement. To his surprise, I informed him that I was already aware of everything. I revealed that I had been monitoring and listening to his conversations with her through cameras and voice-activated recorders, even showing him where he concealed his marijuana. He was taken aback and fell silent. I didn't want to hear any justifications from him, as he understood the gravity of his actions. His tears seemed like an attempt to gain sympathy from me, but I remained resolute, knowing that what's done is done. It has been 2 weeks since I served my husband with divorce papers, and we have 70 days left for the divorce to be finalized. The house has not been sold yet, but there are 2 strong interests from potential buyers. My soon-to-be ex-husband and I continue to reside in the same house, sleeping in separate bedrooms. My daughter is no longer speaking with my husband, and I'm acting as a mediator, hoping to reconcile their relationship. My sons still maintain contact with their father, but have significantly lost respect for him. I understand that my family will never be the same, and I've come to terms with that reality. Regarding his affair partner, I heard she was released on bail but is still facing court proceedings, and her case remains pending. I believe she may receive a prison sentence exceeding 2 years.